We have got them where we want them. This is now over, and they will kick and scream and try their best not to let this be published. But in the end, we'll do to them what we're going to do to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change when, in my capacity as an expert reviewer for it, I report this error to them next week. And I will be saying to them, you must correct this, and if you do not correct it, then the fraud authorities in Switzerland, to whom I am copying this letter and to whom I've had to write before when you've refused to correct errors, will be invited this time to take action, because this error, unlike the previous ones we've reported, is of such magnitude that there is no case for the continued existence of your organisation at all.
This is Dan Dix here reporting for Press for Truth, and I am here joined by the one and only Lord Christopher Monckton, a man who's made it his mission to expose the global warming, man-made climate change hoax, if you will. Now, the last time we spoke was a few years ago in Las Vegas, and I interviewed you about the current climate change agenda and the advancement towards a new world order, a one world government type of system. Where are we at today in terms of the man-made climate change hysteria? Is that still a major push from the oligarchy?
The first stage of it was this: the Copenhagen, draft Copenhagen Treaty of 2009. The UN had become so overconfident that nobody would challenge it, that it included in the draft of the treaty several mentions of the fact that it was establishing a global government, because that was the only way that one could deal with the supposed crisis of global warming. That has continued to be its line since, though it now has the sense not to say so in public, because I exposed the draft treaty last time. The video got 5 million hits on YouTube, and the treaty eventually failed because people realized that this was not acceptable, that the UN was trying to go for this power grab using climate change as the pretext. And a lot of the governments that support the climate change agenda do so not because they think for a single moment there's going to be a serious amount of climate change, but because they realize it's a very convenient way of advancing totalitarian agendas and control of the people by methods other than the ballot box. So we still have to fight that battle, because it is, ever since the early imperial Chinese, it has been in the nature of government to be totalitarian. And the Confucians, that's the libertarians, oppose the legalists, that's the totalitarians. And even in Hong Kong to this day, the students will write essays, rather careful ones, now they're under China again, which discuss the difference between Confucianism and legalism, legalism being totalitarianism, Confucianism being libertarianism. That's the fundamental divide in politics. And it always will be. But what I hoped I have done at this conference today, presenting our very latest scientific result, is that we can now demonstrate formally in mathematics that are so simple that a child with elementary high school algebra will be able to understand what we've discovered, that there is no basis for alarm about global warming. The maximum global temperature that we might expect to see in the next 150 years, during which time we will double the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, is approximately 1 to 1.2 Celsius. I mean, we're looking at a very, very small amount of global warming per doubling of CO2, which is the standard metric they use. And we can prove it, and this is the new thing. There is no doubt about what we have found, and what is still more of a nightmare for the climate scientists who've been pushing this agenda for so long, the area in which they've got their mathematics wrong is an area which is outside climate science. It's in control theory, and so every control theorist, and there are plenty of those around, probably more of them than there are climate scientists, will be able to look at our result and say to the climate scientist, actually, you have got this wrong. So what they did was they left out the fact that the sun is shining from their calculations at a vital point. And the result was that they were attributing to man effects which were in fact happening because the sun was shining. This was a very, very big mistake. And we have proven not only that it was a mistake, we've proved exactly how the mistake came to be, and that they've taken an equation that they used to work out how much warming there's going to be, which turns out to be the difference between two equilibrium states in the full equation, which includes the term for sunshine. You would subtract two equations, each with a common term in them, that term will subtract it out, and that's what they did by mistake. And once they'd taken the sunshine out, and once they'd taken out all the greenhouse gases that were there before we had anything to do with it, took those out as well for good measure, measure by this subtraction, they were left with an equation which, though still correct, couldn't tell them the vital answer, which is how much global warming we're going to get. You could only find that out if you put the sun back. That's what we've done. We found the answer. It's 1.15 Kelvin, about 2 Fahrenheit. That is our best estimate of how much global warming you'll get per doubling of CO2. And that means that the warming we do get will be slow, small, harmless, and beneficial. So the scare really is over.
So what in your opinion then is the reasons why they would want to convince the world that it was mankind, that we are the ones who have been doing this instead of the sun? Why the focus on blaming what's happening and or may not be happening on mankind?
Most climate scientists don't have very much mathematics or physics. They go into climate science because it's a softer option, particularly these days where all you really have to do is learn the party line and you've got a job for life. You don't have to understand why the party line is the party line, you just have to understand what it is and you can parrot it. And that's what a lot of them do. And particularly if they're brought up in the left-wing universities, which is most of them now, they will tend to go along with the party line because they know that it's instant social ostracism and eventual expulsion from the university if you dare to depart from the party line. One of our co-authors has already been sacked from his university on a trumped-up charge simply because his name was found on a copy of our paper. They are vicious, these people. But the main thing that climatology did was they just didn't know enough climate science to know what they were doing. And they made a mistake. They hadn't realized that the system gain equation that they should have been using it must include a term for what's known as the input signal. And the input signal in the climate is the sun, of course. They'd left it out. And we sent the paper recently for review to a journal, which we knew would throw it out because we knew it was a particularly Marxist journal and we knew they would never print it. But we wanted to see what kind of arguments they'd try to produce. And in the end, all they could say is, well, this is just wrong. One of the reviewers actually said that they couldn't find any arguments as to why we were wrong. This is just wrong, because they couldn't believe that the processes known as temperature feedbacks were influenced by the sun or by the pre-existing greenhouse gases before we had anything to do with it. And yet the last sudden extra 0.7 Kelvin or 1 Fahrenheit added on top of the 250 odd Kelvin that were already there, suddenly this was going to cause feedbacks when nothing that came previously had caused them. Well, this of course is nonsense. There is no intellectual case for that. And so we have got them where we want them. This is now over. And they will kick and scream and try their best not to let this be published. But in the end, we'll do to them what we're going to do to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change when, in my capacity as an expert reviewer for it, I report this error to them next week. And I will be saying to them, you must correct this, and if you do not correct it, then the fraud authorities in Switzerland, to whom I am copying this letter and to whom I've had to write before when you've refused to correct errors, will be invited this time to take action, because this error, unlike the previous ones we've reported, is of such magnitude that there is no case for the continued existence of your organisation at all, and any attempt by you, therefore, to suppress the emergence of this as a correction to all of your previous reports will be seen as self-serving and corrupt, and we're not having that. So we're no longer going to tolerate any backsliding by these people. They're going to have to be fair. If they can find a legitimate scientific reason why they think we're wrong, we'll look at that. But if they're simply going to refuse, as they did before, either to give a scientific reason or to correct their error, the fraud authorities in several nations will be alerted and will be requested to move in. And if they don't, here in the United States, we will be using the RICO statute against those states who persist in trying to pursue a climate change agenda, which is now proven to be baseless.
Awesome. Well, in closing, moving forward here, is there anything that the viewers here who are watching might be able to do to help you and your cause and to make sure this paper gets properly published? What can people do who want to get involved?
Well, the first thing is just to write to me at monckton@mail.com and say that you support me. I've never asked for money, because so far we've done all of this research without being paid. None of us is paid to do this, and I've been doing it for 7 years now, and nobody's paid me a red cent in that time. And this is quite important, because we do science because we're interested in science, so we haven't asked for money. What we do want is support, so that you make sure that once this news comes to you, you make sure you circulate it tweet about, through whatever networks you have, to your local newspapers, write letters, do whatever, just to spread the word, because the mainstream news media are going to try their damnedest never to report this. And again, of course, we may be able to use the fraud laws against them, because if they back the climate change agenda and refuse to say that there is in fact another side of it which demonstrates conclusively that the official agenda has always been completely wrong, then that does raise questions about their integrity, which we will certainly pursue. And one of the things that may emerge from this is a new international network of what I'll loosely call centre-right 24-hour news stations, which will allow precisely this kind of news to get a proper airing in a manner which at the present it doesn't.
Links will be located in the description below. Make sure you check it out, folks. Once again, thanks for talking to us.
Thank you.